Joss, and she just nailed it today in a spectacular way. I think we're all kind of thrilled.
In a world where guitarists often chase fame, Jeff Beck chased sound, and in doing so, he became a legend. But behind every string he bent and every note he let cry, there was a secret, a list of 6 bands that didn't just inspire him, but haunted his every musical decision. These were not just influences. They were obsessions, kind that made him sit in the studio for hours trying to recreate reverb tones from forgotten surf records or spend nights arguing over recording techniques. Long after the lights had dimmed, Beck was no ordinary listener. He was a scientist dissecting the DNA of music with surgical intensity. Today, Offstage Tales reveals the 6 bands that consumed Beck's artistic soul. The ones that drove his genius, stirred his rivalries, and sometimes even broke his spirit. These aren't the usual names you'd expect to see on a Legends list, and yet each one plays a vital role in explaining how Beck went from blues apprentice to sonic revolutionary. As we count down this explosive list, you'll hear stories of studio experiments, musical feuds, rejected collaborations, and mysterious recording sessions that shaped Beck's approach to sound forever. Prepare to see a different side of the guitar icon, the listener, the perfectionist, the student obsessed with mastery. These are the bands that cracked open Jeff Beck's mind and rewired his very idea of what music could be. And trust us, the deeper we dig, the more twisted, brilliant, and downright unbelievable the story becomes. Let's begin with number 6, a name that stunned even Beck's closest friends. When most people think of Jeff Beck, they imagine blistering solos, wailing distortion. In groundbreaking fusion, rarely do they picture him hunched over a reel-to-reel tape player in 1967, trying desperately to mimic the clean, twangy reverb of a 1960s surf band. But that's exactly what happened when Beck fell headfirst into a quiet obsession with the Ventures, the instrumental group that flipped rock music on its head without ever singing a word. It all began when a young Beck heard Walk, Don't Run playing on pirate radio, a sound so clean, so direct, and so evocative that it stopped him cold. According to music journalist Chris Welch, Beck reportedly declared to his Yardbirds bandmates, "These guys proved you don't need words to tell a story. Every note counts when there's nowhere to hide." That sentiment would define Beck's entire approach to guitar. While his British peers worshipped American blues singers and mimicked their vocal style, Beck gravitated toward pure guitar narrative, the idea that the instrument itself could sing. In 1967, at a London studio session, Beck allegedly spent hours adjusting amplifiers, reverbs, and mic placements trying to reproduce the Ventures' signature surf tone. "This is what guitars should sound like in wide-open spaces," he told his producer, clearly intoxicated by the precision of their sound. Though the Ventures likely never knew the extent of Beck's admiration, their influence was embedded deep in his artistic DNA. Their rejection of vocals gave Beck permission to let his guitar speak. Their commitment to melody over bombast gave him a blueprint for emotional communication without words. And most importantly, they validated something Beck always believed, but couldn't articulate, that true musicianship didn't need a frontman. It just needed heart. In an industry obsessed with volume, ego, and spectacle, the Ventures taught Beck the radical idea that silence, strategically placed, could be louder than a scream. For Beck, the Ventures weren't just a band, they were proof that instrumental music could be intimate, raw, and powerful enough to move millions. And so began his lifelong mission, to make every note count. In the swirling maelstrom of 1960s British rock, where egos clashed louder than amplifiers, the story of Jeff Beck and Cream stands as one of the most complex musical rivalries of the era. On paper, Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton should have been Elias-Stu blues-rooted virtuosos pushing boundaries with their guitars. But beneath the surface, an undercurrent of tension boiled, fed by overlapping careers, contrasting philosophies, and whispered critiques that never quite reached the other's ears. When Beck replaced Clapton in the Yardbirds in 1965, just as Clapton was forming Cream with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, the industry didn't just notice, it held its breath. According to Beck's former manager Simon Napier Bell, Beck once scoffed, Eric's got the volume, but he's missing the finesse. Power without precision is just noise. The comment, though never spoken to Clapton directly, quickly spread through London's tight-knit music circles like wildfire. While Cream was redefining the boundaries of blues rock with thundering solos and wall of sound arrangements, Beck was quietly studying their every move, noting the places where he felt technique had been sacrificed for spectacle. In interviews, Beck often stressed the need for subtlety and nuance, even claiming that musical evolution requires restraint, not just louder amps. Yet despite the criticism, there was grudging admiration. When Cream disbanded in 1968, Beck allegedly told his bandmates, Eric finally figured out when to stop. That moment marked a shift, not just in Beck's opinion of Clapton, but in his approach to music. He later admitted to Guitar World that Cream had taught him a vital lesson, that sometimes you have to go loud just to make silence hit harder. For Beck, Cream embodied both the seduction and the danger of unrestrained power-roll. Emotional and undeniably influential, but also a reminder that without control, volume becomes chaos. Their relationship was never one of friendship, but rather a chess match between two sonic architects, each building towers of tone with different bricks. Beck didn't want to copy Cream. He wanted to be their counterpointless thunder, more scalpel, and in doing so, he carved out a space all his own in the pantheon of guitar gods. It's not every day that a guitarist joins his favorite band and then proceeds to outgrow it, but that's exactly what happened when Jeff Beck stepped into the shoes of Eric Clapton and joined the Yardbirds in 1965. For Beck, the journey started years earlier, as a hungry young musician studying Clapton's solos from the shadows of a smoky London club. That's exactly what I want to do, only better, he reportedly told friends, and that ambition didn't go unnoticed. Yardbirds management took note, and when Clapton left to pursue purer blues territory, Beck was tapped as the replacement. It should have been a dream come true, but instead became a battleground between honoring a legacy and forging a new identity. In rehearsals, Beck was known to practice Clapton's solos note for note before transforming them into something wild, unpredictable, and undeniably his own. Some foundations you build on, others you tear down and rebuild, told a bandmate during this period, a declaration of both respect and rebellion. The Yardbirds, already on the cutting edge of blues-infused rock, suddenly became Beck's playground for experimentation. He introduced feedback, distortion, and tonal bending in ways that left even seasoned producers confused and awestruck. Yet with innovation came friction. Beck often clashed with bandmates over direction and control, and the pressure to live up to Clapton's legacy weighed heavily. He later described the experience as inheriting a perfectly tuned race car. You respect what came before, but you want to see how fast it can really go. That metaphor encapsulated his entire relationship with the Yardbirds, a mix of admiration, defiance, and sheer creative velocity. He didn't want to be the next Clapton. He wanted to obliterate the idea that there even needed to be one. The Yardbirds gave Beck his first taste of fame, but more importantly, they gave him the platform to rewrite the rules. It was here, in the crucible of expectation and experimentation, that Jeff Beck began to evolve from a student of blues into a master of something entirely new. And though the band's legacy is often tied to its multiple legendary guitarists, for Beck, it was never about fitting into the mold. It was about breaking it. Among all of Jeff Beck's musical fixations, none were more mentally taxing or more humbling than his obsession with King Crimson. While most of the music industry was still catching up to blues-driven rock, King Crimson was busy detonating it, replacing traditional song structure with sprawling, math-like compositions that sounded more like classical nightmares than rock anthems. When Beck first heard their 1969 debut in the Court of the Crimson King, he allegedly muttered, "They took all the safety out of rock music. Every chord change is like stepping off a cliff." The comment wasn't exaggeration. It was admiration laced with fear. Crimson's complexity wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. Beck, always known for his intuitive, field-driven playing, suddenly found himself confronted with music that required architectural precision and theoretical depth. According To his former roadie, Beck would spend hours trying to replicate the band's shifting time signatures and melodic detours, often frustrating his own bandmates in the process. The obsession reached its peak in 1972 when Beck allegedly approached Robert Fripp backstage about a possible collaboration. Fripp declined, saying, "Jeff's technique is impressive, but our music requires a different kind of mathematical thinking." That rejection hit Beck hard. It sent him spiraling into a year-long study of music theory, a rare move for someone who had previously relied entirely on instinct. And yet, the impact of King Crimson was undeniable. Beck didn't just admire their sound, he envied their ability to bend the rules of reality through music. He once told a journalist, "I thought I was pushing boundaries, then I heard Crimson and realized I was still playing inside a box." For Beck, King Crimson wasn't just another band to emulate. They were a force that reminded him how far the horizon could stretch when you had the courage to let go of structure. It wasn't about imitation, it was about elevation. Crimson shattered his perception of what rock music could be and dared him to reach beyond the fretboard, into the mathematical unknown. To most of the world, the Beatles were pop icons, beloved for their catchy hooks and boyish charm. But to Jeff Beck, they were something else entirely, a sonic laboratory that transformed the studio into an instrument. His fascination reportedly began in 1966 at a London listening party for Revolver, where producer George Martin detailed the innovative recording process behind the album. Beck stayed until 3 a.m., firing off technical questions with the intensity of a man on the edge of revelation. "They're not just making songs," he reportedly told a friend afterward. "They're building sonic architectures." That line would come to define Beck's view of what music should be, not just performed, but constructed, like audio blueprints for the future. He became obsessed with their use of backwards recordings, tape manipulation, and overdubbing, often asking studio engineers at Abbey Road for details on how the Beatles achieved their signature sounds. In 1968, while recording Beckla in the same building where George Martin was finalizing Beatles projects, Beck was known to sneak into rooms and grill staff about effects and layering. To him, their work wasn't magic, it was methodology, he later said. "Some musicians perform music, some sculpt it. The great ones do both." Though he never directly collaborated with the Fab Four, their influence seeped into his experimental phases, especially as he began to move away from traditional blues and embrace genre fusion. More than any other band, the Beatles showed Beck that sound could be molded like clay, that a guitar didn't just need to scream, it could whisper, growl, or disappear altogether if the song called for it. They validated his belief that technical prowess wasn't enough, had to serve emotion, story, and texture. And in doing so, they didn't just inspire Beck, they liberated him. At the very core of Jeff Beck's musical DNA lies one name that predates all the rest. A band that didn't just inspire him, but built the very foundation of his guitar philosophy, the Shadows. This British instrumental group, led by the iconic Hank Marvin, introduced a young Beck to the idea that a guitar could speak as clearly as any human voice. His obsession reportedly began in 1960 when he first heard Apache on Radio Luxembourg. From that moment, he was hooked. According to Hank Marvin himself, Beck became fixated on their tremolo technique and melodic phrasing, often mimicking them in practice sessions long before he ever stepped on a professional stage. This wasn't just admiration, it was identity. Formation. As Beck rose to prominence, he began weaving shadow-style licks into blues rock arrangements, using clean reverb tones and soaring melodies to build emotional peaks without uttering a single word. He once said during a recording session, "Tonight they'll understand that guitars can sing without lyrics." That belief never left him. Even decades later, Beck would cite the Shadows not just as a favorite band, but as a compass one that pointed him toward expressive purity and melodic storytelling. In a rare 1980 interview, he said of Marvin, "He taught me that every note should mean something. As any other guitarist made instrumentals your grandmother and your girlfriend can both love, for Beck, the Shadows proved that music could be beautiful without being loud, technical without being sterile, and emotional without saying a word." They were more than an influence. They were a mirror reflecting who he was meant to become. And in the end, no matter how far he traveled musically, Jeff Beck always carried a piece of the shadows with him. So there you have it, the 6 bands that shaped, challenged, and sometimes tormented Jeff Beck. From the quiet elegance of the Ventures to the brutal complexity of King Crimson, from the studio wizardry of the Beatles to the melodic grace of the Shadows. These weren't just names in his record collection, they were pillars in his artistic cathedral. They taught him what to reject, what to reimagine, and what to obsess over until it drove him into the studio at midnight, searching for a sound no one else could hear. Jeff Beck wasn't just a player, he was a listener, student of form and frequency, who knew that greatness didn't come from raw talent alone, but from the courage to chase the music that scared you, humbled you, and made you want to tear everything down just to build it back up better. The question now isn't just who did Beck admire, it's what are today's guitar heroes obsessed with? Because in the end, every genius is a fan of someone. And for Beck, these 6 bands weren't just inspiration, they were the map.